Welcome back to On Texas Football, a little weekend conversation. I'm CJ Vogel, joined by Gerry Hamilton. We're going to go through a little running back conversation because I know that's been at the forefront. Obviously, Texas goes out and hires Coach Scott from West Virginia to replace Tashard Choice, who's off to the NFL. No more recruiting for Tashard Choice. He's ready for that NFL, vacation time, and I can't blame him at all. So Texas making the move to go get Coach Scott from West Virginia. Now, of course, it's all about finalizing these official visits, which has kind of been a conversation point over the last 24 hours on the social media, on Twitter, on timelines, on the message board as well. We're going to talk about that right now. Right now, only one official visit truly set in right now. And, of course, we mentioned that this morning on ontexasfootball.com. That was Xavier Crowell finalizing that date Friday evening. But, Gerry, I want to get your thoughts on Javian Osborne first. Of course, he did come out Friday evening and said, you know what? No more Texas official visit for now.
Yeah, for now. I think for now is the word. I don't think Texas is out of this at all. I think we saw this, when Tashard Choice, which we'll get to initially, took the Lions job, a little bit of time, maybe an hour passed by, and Xavier Crowell said, I'm not visiting anymore. So this is kind of what happens with coaching change. And then when Texas starts going through his process of deciding who he's going to hire, there isn't a lot of conversation because what question can you really answer until you have your hire made? So I don't think Texas is out of it for Javian Osborne. It wouldn't shock me if he doesn't end up making an official visit to Texas. I think this is just going to be now Chad Scott, Steve Sarkisian making contact once again now that Chad Scott is in at Texas, which I believe happened Friday night, by the way. I was told that Texas did have communication with Javian Osborne Friday night. So now that communication starts back, now that Chad Scott, Sark has announced his hire as Chad Scott, and we'll see where it goes from there. But it will not surprise me if Osborne doesn't end up making a visit to Texas. I'm not saying it's a lock, but it just won't surprise me. Texas is not out for Osborne.
Well, good note there, of course. It does feel like Michigan has become the overwhelming leader of the team, at least in pole position at the moment for Osborne. So we'll see, of course, when that date, if that date is finalized for him moving forward. I did mention Xavier Crowell. He did tweet out Friday evening that he is going to be back in Austin for his official visit June 6th through 8th. Of course, Texas was heavily involved with his recruitment. And as you mentioned, Gerry, he said, I'm not going to Texas. The minute after, essentially, Tashard Choice took that job with the Lions, he had that conversation with Coach Chad Scott earlier last night. That official visit is back on as well. And, of course, we are monitoring the official visit timeline for KJ Edwards as well, the running back out of Carthage. I know Texas is involved with him right now. There's some murmurs. It might be June 13th. We'll, of course, see if that is finalized by him. But, Gerry, I wanted to get your thoughts on who else might be candidates to get an official visit from Chad Scott from Texas, from Sarkisian.
Yeah, I want to hit on Xavier Crowell for a second if I can. So Crowell obviously has been on campus twice with his mom before he reclassed to 26. His other official visits are Georgia, May 30th, that first weekend in June. That's Georgia's big visit weekend. Then after Texas is Auburn and Alabama. I mean, that is a real Southeast region's SEC recruiting bloodbath there. And Xavier Crowell, look, he likes Texas a lot. Does that mean he's going to Texas? It does not. I'm not surprised that official visit came back after he had conversation with new running back coach Chad Scott and members of the Texas staff. That doesn't surprise me. On KJ Edwards, we hit on that. It could be June 6th. It could be June 13th. What we're waiting for now is to see when it's finalized after the initial phone call with Chad Scott. What date is it finalized before we say which one it is? Because we've heard it both ways. It's been reported both ways, but we're going to wait for Chad Scott to make that confirmation with KJ Edwards, and KJ Edwards has a finalized official visit date because we don't want to be flipping it back and forth. Other running back prospects, Texas is going to go after Derek Cooper, the 5-star running back from Hollywood, Florida, Chaminade, Madonna. I don't think there's any doubt about that. 6'1", 205 pounds, ran 10.7 FAT 100 first meet of the year. He's expected to get into the 10.5s if he does that. Jeez. I mean, Katie bar the door, right? As a recruit. He's a former Georgia commitment, same high school as Jeremiah Smith, some other top guys, Kenyatta Jackson, Ohio State. A lot of guys have come through Chaminade, Madonna of late. But we do expect Texas to recruit Derek Cooper. And I've been told twice since Texas offered Derek Cooper, and this isn't some long-standing relationship he had with Tashard Choice like some other guys. Texas just offered him late in January, the day that Chashard Choice and staff members were at American Heritage to see Dia Bell. So that was the last Thursday of January. So this was a very recent offer. So there's not a long-standing relationship there. But we've been told that Derek Cooper has interest in Texas. He wants to visit Texas, and he is open to the idea of the University of Texas. So it sounds similar to Jamie French. We'll see what if he gets on campus this spring, and then an official visit happens and what comes of that. Because obviously we're not saying Derek Cooper is going to end up at Texas at all.
Right.
There's strong competition there with Georgia, Florida, Miami, all the SEC powers are in on Derek Cooper, as well as your Ohio State. Ryan Day came through, Michigan. Everybody's come through to see Derek Cooper. And then we'll have to see on Amari Latimer what happens there. That's another one that was a long-standing relationship with the Chashard Choice. That's one that we'll have to see if Chad Scott makes contact there. Or does Chad Scott have somebody he offered at West Virginia that he really likes and feels like is an underrated guy, or somebody that maybe he hadn't offered that he thinks is really good and he thinks he can get on now that he's at Texas? Because one thing I know, CJ, you're going to point out, Chad Scott hadn't offered the guys Texas offered, and that's because he wasn't going to get them at West Virginia. So why are you going to spin your wheels and waste your time?
Yeah, that's a good point, Jerry. I did want to go back a little bit to Derek Cooper. Look, getting those guys on the campus for the spring is huge. We've seen recruitments kind of turn. Josiah Sharma was another one that's worth mentioning a year ago, where once you got on campus for a spring practice, I know spring practice might not be what it was last year, but it's still a visit to the University of Texas, to Austin for a day or two to get acclimated. Jerry, I did want to ask you about Chad Scott. What is a success in year one on the recruiting trail? I know that that's a topic of conversation as well. Is it just any combination of the two of the names that we just mentioned, or is there more to that, kind of starting to plant some roots in cities and in territorial recruitments as well?
Yeah, I think for him, year one, as far as running back recruiting, is hitting on one of those high-end targets. You got to remember, I mean, I think people think every recruit Chashard Choice got was a high-end recruit. That's not the case. I mean, Trey Wisner was not one of those guys, and he's a really good player. Ricky Stewart, not one of those highly recruited guys. We'll see now. Chashard Choice had his hits on the big guys, the Cedric Baxters, Jarrett Gibsons, James Simon, those guys. But then, when you sign two running back classes, sometimes it's a big name guy, and then sometimes it's a guy you really like as your second piece to that, who are different types of backs. So I think hitting on one of those national guys for sure, and then getting a second guy he likes. Then as a recruiter as a whole, though, I think is different, because he's going to go into Orlando in the Southwest Corridor of Florida, where Chashard Choice was. And he has years and years, 2 decades of time recruiting in those areas. He's from Plant City, Plant City, Florida. Right. I mean, he grew up there. He knows every coach, all the 7-on-7 coaches, all the key people in the Tampa area and up through Orlando. So I think continuing to help get guys from Florida on campus to give Texas as many shots on goal as possible with the Sunshine State kids that they've offered. I mean, he may have to give Kenny Baker an assist on a Kendall Gurville at Fort Myers, help with because he's recruited guys from Clearwater High. He helped Kyle Flood with Samuel Roseboro, maybe through that staff, just giving some assists, and also maybe hitting some different areas in Florida, finding some other really talented guys for Texas to look at in 26, as well as making sure they're in on the right guys in 27.
Yeah, I'm going to be really interested to see, Jerry, how quickly he becomes a guy that recruits just beyond running back, because that was a big part of Chashard Choice's job as well, right? We've seen him a year ago. He was the sit-down guy with Coach Flood and Sarkisian for Michael Fasusi. Of course, he went to Georgia and helped out with some of the defensive linemen out there, Florida as well. We've talked about his importance time and time again. How quickly can Chad Scott become a guy like that? I think that'll be huge. Of course, he's 43 years old. Chashard Choice, about 40 years old, but 17 years of coaching history already with Chad Scott. So he's been around the bush quite a bit already. I did want to bring up this tweet from Coach Lavender over at Duncanville. He was previously at Lovejoy, offensive coordinator with Parker Livingstone, Dalen McCutcheon. He said the hiring of Chad Scott is a game changer. He's an elite coach and recruiter. Of course, this comes on the heels of some of the news last night that we just talked about with official visits. So that's a sign of, I would say a great sign right now, Jerry, in terms of what he can be in the state of Texas already, having that reputation. I did want to ask you, because we've seen, or at least going through the West Virginia roster, there's running backs also from Maryland, Pennsylvania. They got a couple from Ohio. are those areas that Texas might venture into a little bit more, or is it just, hey, it's icing on the cake? If there's a prospect out there, we can send Coach Scott out there to go, kind of.
Yeah, I think it's more that where West Virginia is centered, they have to recruit Pennsylvania, Ohio, Maryland, the DMV 757s. They have to get players. I still think Texas is going to be their focus is going to remain Texas, east of Florida, up through Georgia. And now Chad Scott recruited North Carolina for years. I mean, while on the North Carolina staff. So maybe if Texas dabbles more, if there's a running back in Carolina, somebody in Carolina he may have a connection to on a staff, you could see that. But I think there's so much talent. And I'm not saying it's not possible because Texas is a national recruiting brand and program now under Sark. But I do think there's so much running back talent from Southern California to Texas, east to Florida, and up into Georgia. It's going to take a pretty – if Chad Scott goes after somebody in the Midwest, the Northeast at running back, they think that guy is a stud. Mm-hmm. That's what I'd say because there's so much talent around the Southeast region at running back and every position really, but running back, that if Chad Scott ventures into those areas, they think the guy is really, really, really high end.
Yeah, you mentioned North Carolina. Look, Jeff Banks in the end of January went out there and offered 5 edge rushers. I'm not saying that there's a correlation there, but hey, with history in the state already and where Texas is recruiting at primary positions, that might be a place I would deploy Chad Scott early on in his tenure when the coaches are back out on the road in the spring. We'll see, of course, how that kind of plays out. But I did want to add this. C.J. Baxter, of course, recovering from a knee injury. I've heard that he's been very active in his recovery off the crutches. Obviously, he's been walking around, trying to get some light jogging in, not yet cutting, of course. We're still doubtful that he is participant in spring football, but for the fact that he is right here in his recovery, I would say is a great sign. Texas, of course, going to take it as slow and as cautious as possible to make sure that he is ready come fall camp. Jerry, one more question for you about Coach Scott and this running back room. I know that we've talked about look, running back might be a spot that they look at in the portal when it comes to adding a proven piece. Look, there's been some whispers about Jaheim White as well. I'm not saying that there's a connection or that there's going to be, any type of domino effect with him to Texas, but what is a prospect like Jaheim White like? And is Texas a school that should look in the portal for a running back come the next fall?
Yeah, I think that's going to be interesting with the portal and Chad Scott because I'll never forget you had the quote, "Choice is good," before Arizona State when asked about the portal and running back. So the short choice wasn't planning on going to the portal for running back. Now, that doesn't mean they didn't maybe have a conversation with Justice Haynes just to see what was going on before he made his decision, right? But it's going to be interesting because Chad Scott's a different set of eyes and a different thought process because he's not going to see C.J. Baxter. He's not going to see Christian Clark. And you mentioned C.J. Baxter. Even if he's ready to maybe start going full speed in August, that doesn't mean he's going to be ready for padded contact in August or September. That is to be determined where he's really at. And Christian Clark, that's a long recovery as well. So this spring, and I'm saying all just because 2 guys are out, what is probably the better term Chad Scott's going to see it without full pads on in the spring is Trey Wisner, Jarrett Gibson, James Simon, Ricky Stewart.
Yep.
Jaden Blue's gone, obviously, and Colin Page, the walk-on running back as well, who's a good player. So he's not going to get a full look at his roster. And he offered Cedric Baxter. He recruited Cedric Baxter because he recruited Orlando area at West Virginia, even though he wasn't going to get him. So he has a feel for Cedric Baxter. He probably never really recruited Christian Clark. So where's his feel on that? So it's going to be interesting how him and Sark kind of talk about this running back position. As far as Jaheim White, if he jumped in the portal, 5'7", 195-pound back, tremendous player. But my question with running backs that go in the portal is this. Do you go in the portal? If you go in the portal, are you going to go to a school where you're the number 2 back? Because Trey Weiser's a 1,000-yard rusher and knows the system, and it's going to be in year 3, and it's going to be bigger, stronger next year than he was a year ago. So are you really, if you jump in the portal, you're going to say, yeah, that's the place I need to be? Because you were just in at West Virginia. If you leave West Virginia, C.J. Donaldson was the number 1 back and you were the number 2. Are you really going to jump in the portal and go into the same situation? Maybe. But maybe that's not what you're looking for.
Right.
That's the hard thing for running back for me when talking about running backs going into the portal. If you jump in there, you're not jumping in to go be the 2 somewhere.
And look, he's had back-to-back 800-yard seasons at West Virginia. Now, Neil Brown is gone.
Right.
Scott's gone. So who knows? But point being, he would theoretically be in line to be the guy at West Virginia once again.
He'd be the guy at West Virginia. And if not, think about this. Just say he went into the portal and he's taking a look at Texas. You have Trey Weiser's a 1,000-yard rusher, and C.J. Baxter, who started some as a freshman, and Jarrett Gibson, who scored touchdowns against Michigan. And I'm not sure you look at that and say, oh, yeah, that's the scenario. That's the situation I'm looking for. We'll have to see how it plays out.
Right. Of course. We will see how that plays out. We'll have everything covered at ontexasfootball.com. But, Jerry, thank you very much for your time. This running back conversation will be continued again. A lot to kind of finalize with these official visits and, of course, theorize about as spring football nears. But thank you, Jerry, and thank you all for watching. Make sure to like, subscribe, ring the bell so you're notified when these videos drop. But y'all have a great weekend, and we'll talk to you soon. Welcome.